Number 3 is short and sweet. Kind of talked about it earlier. You're Notre Dame. You're O-line U. You've put multiple players in the first round year after year after year. You've gone against the big boys, Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, all of them for offensive linemen, and you've been winning for years. Notre Dame has to continue to do that. And there's a little bit of a concern for me in this class that right now Notre Dame is not really in the pole position for any of the top offensive tackles. Now they're in the game, but they've got to come back and they've got to close. There's really two guys I have in mind here, and that is Zach Rice from Virginia and Tyler Booker from Florida. And he goes to IMG Academy. He's originally a Northeastern kid, a New Jersey kid. So they have to get one of those two players. They're both top 50 recruits. They're both big, physical, dominant players that are tackles to me, but also project to be able to move should the need arise. But you need to recruit the best of the best when you're at Notre Dame. Joey Tanona is that as an interior player. Ty Chan is more of a project high upside kind of guy, but not a sure thing by any stretch of the imagination. Notre Dame has to go out and they have to be able to get one of the nation's best offensive tackles. And to me, Zach Rice would be that guy. Tyler Booker could be that guy. There's some other highly ranked players on the board, but to me, those two guys stand out above the rest. You know, Joe Bruner from Wisconsin is a good player, but I don't know if he's definitely a tackle. He's kind of got some guard in him a little bit, but he's another big, strong, physical player that would be on the board. He'd kind of be that next level guy, still a really good pickup, but I think he's more of a guard. And the same thing with Billy Schrouth. I think Billy Schrouth is an outstanding blocker, and Notre Dame should definitely push for him. But the reason he's not really in this mold is because I view a guy like him and I view a guy like Joe Bruner as not pure tackles. They're more right tackle guard type of players. Very good prospects, but I'm looking more for a pure tackle. There aren't even a ton of them in this class, but I think Zach Rice and Tyler Booker are just that high level player that you have to be able to get when you're at the University of Notre Dame. So if this class is going to be elite, they have to always have a great O-line class. And one of those two guys, to me, is a must get in this class. And number 5, I love sleeper offensive linemen because to me, offensive line is one of the hardest positions to project moving forward. And that's why every year in the draft, you see some former 2-star or former 3-star kid going in the first round. It happens almost every single year because that is the position more than most where there is so much projectability from a body standpoint. A lot of the top linemen coming out of high school are ready-made guys. They're already 300 pounds. They're just bigger and stronger than everybody else. They can kind of bully. And so it's easy to watch Quentin Nelson on film and say, yeah, he's really good. What I like to find and what I think that some of the best offensive line programs around the country, they do so well, like Iowa, for example, they don't get the highly ranked guys that often. They find these guys that are 250, 260 pounds, athletic with long arms and all the traits. They just don't have the bodies yet, and they recruit them and then develop them. And those guys eventually become 300-pound guys that are super athletic and super talented. So when I look at the board on the offensive line this year, I look at Joe Alt last year as being one of those kind of guys. And to me, that's what Tosh Baker was as well, although Tosh got more recruiting love. He was highly ranked, but he's another that type of player, that developing gonna need time guy with super high ceiling. There's two guys in this class to me that fit that bill, and I think Notre Dame needs to get one of them. The first one you've heard me talk about before, and that's Jake Taylor from Bishop Gorman out in Las Vegas. He is not a highly ranked player, not a top 200 recruit, but to me has an exceptionally high upside. His final list of schools basically is like Notre Dame, Oklahoma, and Alabama. I mean, that should tell you everything you need to know about Jake Taylor's upside because those schools are going after him. Oklahoma's considered the leader. Notre Dame is still in the mix. He's a guy that Notre Dame has been hurt by the inability to get him on campus. They're going to have to get him on campus at some point in time soon to have a chance to land him. If he commits before they can get a visit, I'm not going to hammer him because I think they've put in work with Jake Taylor. I just think the fact that he hasn't been able to get on campus, he's one of those kids where it has impacted Notre Dame. So he's one guy. There's another guy that I really like on the offensive line, and he's for a Colorado kid named George Fitzpatrick. He goes to Cherry Creek out in the Denver area. Now, If you're not familiar with that school, it's a very, very good school. It's one of the best schools in the state of Colorado in regards to producing talent, but also winning. It's a great, great program. When you look at him and you say, well, why is he not ranked higher? Because his film is awesome. It's A, he's from Colorado, and B, he's 255 pounds. There's going to be some legitimate questions about the projection. Can he get up to 300 pounds and maintain the athleticism and the talent? I think he can. Now, when I watch this kid on film, and I recently broke him down, I've really only studied him for the last week. I saw some highlights of him, and I loved his highlights. But I said, look, let me get some game film of him and see if he can do this kind of snap after snap. And the thing that I saw from George Fitzpatrick is his game film is even more impressive than his highlights, because you see a kid who at 6'6", 255 pounds, number one, incredible athlete for an offensive lineman. Great feet. His explosiveness off the ball is as good as any offensive lineman in this class. He flies off the ball, and he flies off the ball with a lot more force than you'd think from a 255-pound kid. So he really explodes off the ball, really physical player, uses his hands well, and he's got some punch in his hands. Again, he plays with a lot more physicality than you'd think a 255-pound guy would play with. The athleticism in space, exceptional. His pulling and trapping, he works a lot in space, and he's really good. We don't see a lot of pass blocking from him, but the athleticism is there. So I don't think it's going to be an issue for him. I think he's going to have that ability. He's going to be a good pass blocker at the next level with work. The question is, can he gain 40 pounds and maintain that athleticism and explosiveness? That's going to be the question. That's why he's kind of a sleeper. That's why he's kind of a project type of player. But if you can get one of those two guys and then get one of the big boys, Zach Rice, Tyler Booker, with Joey Tanona, Ty Chan, maybe throw in a Joe Bruner or a Billy Schrouth, good luck finding a better offensive line class in the country. Have fun with that, because here's the deal. For Notre Dame to play with the big boys, they not only have to improve in areas where they're behind those programs now, but you cannot slip at all at the programs where you're at the spots where you're already on their level. Notre Dame is on they're on the top level when it comes to offensive line. They can compete with Bama. They can compete with Oklahoma. They can compete with Ohio State. They're way better than Clemson along the offensive line. They're there. You can't slip. You can't have misses like we've seen Notre Dame have the last two classes. Last year's class was really good as a five-man group, really high upside, some projects below and some depth players below. The 3 to 5 wasn't as good. Now, I love Joe Alt. He's the kind of guy I'm taking a Joe Alt every year. And that's kind of what I view George Fitzpatrick and Jake Taylor as being, but even higher upside than Joe Alt, in my opinion. But you need more depth of impact talent. And the 2022 class has a chance to be that for Notre Dame if they can finish. So they need to get a top tackle. They need to be able to go out and get one of these sleeper tackles. And then if you can add a fifth guy like a Billy Schrouth, like a Joe Bruner, that's an elite offensive line haul. And that's the kind of group that keeps you on pace for what you've been the last decade, which is the premier offensive line program in the country. This is going to be a big class for Notre Dame, and it's going to be a huge class for Jeff Quinn. He's got to finally be able to put together one of those classes that was all his that can match what we saw from Harry Hiestand, which is not just a good one or two. Any Notre Dame offensive line coach will be able to do that, but can your 3 and your 4 and your 5 be dynamic? If you look at the 2017 Notre Dame class, for example, Robert Hainsey, Aaron Banks, Josh Lugg, that's 3 impact blockers. You go to past years, they've always been able to get 3 really impact players. 2014, Quentin Nelson, Alex Bars, and then Sam Mustipher. That's what this class needs. It needs to be deep. It needs to be talented. They need to have more playmakers in this class. So we've laid out the framework for what Notre Dame needs to do to have an elite offensive haul, and that in an offensive haul that is going to allow them to move the needle, to close the gap, whatever expression you want to use, but it puts them closer and closer to being a team that's going to be a legitimate contender, not just to make the playoff and then lose, but to make the playoff and then go toe-to-toe with those teams and ultimately beat them. This is the kind of class Notre Dame needs to have to add to what they've already got to get to that level.